the truth is basically designed to keep us away from the truth. The only way to get to the truth of how we got here is to understand the history of the occult, because the people who have shaped the world politically, at least in the last 300 years, have been devoted to this tradition that I trace back to the 6th century. And the most important clue that got me there was Surat al-Baqarah, verse 102 to 103.
If you're not ruling, if there's no rule by the truth or by the Creator, then it's
whatever you want to make it.
It's Satan then. In a nutshell, what you're saying is that basically there's been a conspiracy of people getting together, siding with the shaitan, basically, either intentionally or not an organized way or inorganized way. And then you had these various movements like the Templars, I think it's the
Rosicrucians.
Yeah, and then and the Freemasons, and then the Illuminati that what we're dealing with right now. Mm-hmm. And obviously you're going to go into the history a little more on that to kind of illustrate that point, how they kind of infiltrated segments in Islamic civilization and history. If you can kind of touch on that.
Yeah, so that's an important point. Thanks for asking. I think if we can, I'll start from today quickly to put it in context. But the reality is, I think there's been an estimate. I'm going to speak frankly. I hope I can, but some people might find this controversial. But the reality is that the estimates I've seen, and we've probably seen it most in our daily lives, that up to 80% of the mosques in North America are Saudi funded. And it's so the Saudis, of course, follow. I would characterize them as a sect. I characterize Wahhabism as a sect. They have called themselves Sunni. I think that that's a ruse. They have effectively redefined what it means to be Sunni to allow themselves to be considered Sunni. So by dominating the discussion, they basically have prevented people from ascertaining of how false that is. And of course, the Saudi family were installed in 1932 with assistance from the British. A year later, 1933, is when they signed their first concessions to Rockefeller Standard Oil. And that's basically what incepted the modern history. So, it wasn't, the Wahhabis hadn't participated in World War II necessarily, not directly like the Sharif of Mecca did, to fight the legitimate Ottoman Empire. But they did take advantage of the vacuum when the Sharif was removed, and then to accept British assistance in claiming the peninsula for their own. I just happened to read yesterday that there's only one absolute monarchy in the world. I believe there's only one, and the Saudi Arabia is one of them. Mm-hmm. And so they never did anything of their own. Their wealth was handed to them, and had been handed to them basically throughout the century. People speak. It's a well-known refrain that most of the world's wars are fought for oil. Well, 30% of that oil comes from Saudi Arabia. So, the majority of the suffering in the world in the 20th century, the Saudis have been indirectly responsible for by largely providing the resources that allowed those funds to be accumulated to carry out most of what's happening in the 20th century. So the Rockefellers basically commandeered the American educational system, and that's how they created the Western civilization course and created this basically propaganda version of Western history. John D. Rockefeller turned to charity, much like Bill Gates did, and created all kinds of tax-exempt foundations. The CIA had two primary sources of funding, or covert funding, and that was from the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation. So most of the CIA's covert operations, from MK Ultra to assassinating people like Mossadegh or Allende in Chile, most of it, I guess, it's support for research into computers, and most recently, largely the environmental movement, which the Rockefellers have been behind. All that has come from their profits out of the oil, our oil, that has been sucked out of the ground in Saudi Arabia, in very close proximity to the Haramain. Right? It's a catastrophic obscenity. The books are all there. They're all gathering dust in the libraries. Instead, we have celebrities who are celebrated as scholars, quote unquote scholars. They are not scholars. They have had maybe a bachelor degree, which is nothing, from some a university, usually in Medina or Mecca, which doesn't qualify them in any way as having the skills necessary to be providing leadership to the Muslims. And instead, they have been given basically a few samplings of information, largely framed around the Wahhabi outlook, and that becomes what they perpetuate. So the problem there is that the true heritage, scholarly heritage, what happened to me is that I was surrounded by Salafis as well too when I first came to Islam, and I have to admit that I got sucked into them as well. When it eventually became clear to me that they were, I have to say, a Zionist plot, and at that point, I thought I decided I wanted to figure out what is then the truth. If that hasn't been the truth all this time, then what is the true path of Sunnism? And it actually took me a couple of years until I got to the point where I realized it had been under our noses the whole time. And that is to follow a madhab, which of course is precisely what Salafism and Wahhabism is out to undermine. To get to the question you guys are mentioning, so the first attack on this, again, came from Ibn Taymiyyah. And so we need to rewind a little bit because we need to understand the context that he lived in. So as I mentioned, it's Surat al-Baqarah that explains that magic was communicated to a group of Jews that had apostatized. This happened in Babylon, and that can be traced to the 6th century BC. What that's referring to is the advent of the Hebrew Kabbalah, the Jewish Kabbalah, which is basically a form of Satanism. It presents itself as a form of mystical tradition within Judaism, but it's basically a heresy that has tried to infiltrate and ultimately hijack the legitimate Jewish religion. So that magical tradition was known in ancient times as the cult of the Magi and became famous throughout the ancient world. It was brought to when the Jews were allowed to return to Israel and rebuild their temple. Some of them went to Greece and some of them went to Egypt. In Greece, they developed the Greek philosophy, particularly that of Plato and Pythagoras, who are widely believed to have studied under the Magi. And then in Egypt, it contributed to what's called Hermeticism. And so in the city of Alexandria, it converged with mystical Judaism, particularly the mysteries of Merkaba, which is basically throne mysticism, and developed the cult of Gnosticism and Christianity, which ultimately that's where the idea of Jesus as a son of God came from. And it was married to what were called ancient mysteries, most importantly, the mysteries of Mithras. So ultimately, Christianity, when the Christian doctrine was imposed at the Council of Nicaea in 333, is basically rebranded according to the basic doctrines of the mysteries of Mithras. So this was basically all one cult. It was many aspects of one single cabalistic tradition. So that survived after the fall of the Roman Empire. It survived in the city of Haran in southeastern Turkey. The people who practice it, so basically they're the ones who resurrected the teachings of the Greek philosophers as well as Hermeticism, but they equate, well, not yet. So when Sultan, I believe it was Al-Ma'mun, came to their community, he asked them to announce which people of the book they belong to, or if not, they would have to either pay jizya or convert to Islam. So they took a couple of days to think about it, and they decided that they were going to say that they were Sabians, because of course in the Quran, the Sabians are one of the people of the book, but the Sabians are actually people who come from, I believe, the Queen of Sheba. So these are fraudulent Sabians, and this was explained by al-Biruni, an Islamic scholar. And so in reality, they were a community, an occult community, that had maintained the teachings of Neoplatonism and Hermeticism. So Ibn Taymiyyah, so the Sabians were crucial to the infiltration of occultism in Islam. They were revered throughout the Middle East by all occultists. I want to call them Muslim occultists because they were occultists, sometimes disguising themselves as Muslim, particularly the Ismailis.
Yeah.
So and the Ismailis contributed to an organization called Ikhwan al-Safa. Ikhwan al-Safa wa Qulan al-Marwa. I can't remember how to translate the whole word, but they're usually referred to as the Brethren of Sincerity or the Brethren of Purity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it wasn't like they were the Brethren of Purity. Like what I read about them was that the reason that they were a secret group is because they were clamped down. Wasn't that true by the Caliph? Because they had to watch themselves. From what I
am sure they did.
Yeah.
They were pretty out there. So they were the crucial link to the survival of occultism in Islam. Ibn Taymiyyah was born in Haran, the city of the Sabians. This tradition, this occult Kabbalist tradition, survived amongst the Mandaeans through that interim period of almost 1,000 years. One of the basic clues of the affinity between the Mandaean teachings and the Kabbalistic teachings is anthropomorphism. Right? Particularly, there's a Kabbalist tradition known as the Shir Koma, which is, I think it translates as measure of the body. Mm-hmm. So these texts would go on, elaborately about the measurements of God's limbs and his size and his, so I wonder if it's not a coincidence that the fundamental inclination that pitted Ibn Taymiyyah against the ulama of his time was his anthropomorphism. And it's that anthropomorphism which was being inherited by the Salafis, because they fundamentally teach an anthropomorphic doctrine, whether they accept it or not. They believe that God lives above the skies. This is the Christian idea. This is Christian idea of God living above, right, overhead. This is the idea of the Christian God comes from Michelangelo. And Michelangelo, when he painted God in the Sistine Chapel, he was actually painting the Ancient of Days, and it's a Kabbalistic concept. The Ancient of Days, actually, this is crucial. I'm probably going off on too much of a tangent, but it's crucial to the history of the occult because that's Saturn, and Saturn is Satan. So that's why he's showed as an old man. So God, the Quran says that God lives beyond, right? It doesn't say there's no direction. And so this is one of the key points when you look at the ulama. They clearly say that God lives formless and without a direction, and it's crucial. And that's also what I was saying about how I came to Islam, is because what was so drawing was this pure idea of God, without all these accoutrements that, other people have added to it, particularly. And I read from the Salafis, I had trouble with this for a long time about their insistence that God is, they often refer to this one hadith of a slave girl that the Prophet questioned, and he asked her, "Where's God?" And she pointed her finger upwards. But this is apparently a weak hadith. It's certainly not a doctrine that's anywhere repeated in the scholarly heritage.
I had a dream 5 years ago. I won't discuss that dream at length, but in a nutshell, it was a dream that I had in Ramadan in 2016 on a Friday. It was mid-Ramadan, and in that there were clear instructions that whatever I had understood, I should make that known. Subhanallah. You'll find that the tradition of this evil and good, these two forces, seem to be at the crux of what Freemasonry is about, the fraternity. It's in Buddhism. It's in many of the New Age religions. And this is what I'm coming to now, is that the spiritual religion seems to be about the pineal gland, the third eye, which is at the apex of the 33rd vertebrae, right? Which is the 33 degrees in Masonry. Once you reach those degrees, then you activate this pineal gland, which gives you access. And this goes back to now Fir'aun, right? Where he claims to be Ana Rabbukum A'la. And you find the hats and the crowns that they wear, they have a snake at the top of it. Just at the top, literally in line with where the pineal gland is, right? And for them, it represents not only Iblis, but also the Sirius stars, I understand it from my studies. Again, if we go back to the Kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Right. وَهُوَ رَبُّ الشِّعْرَى.
Subhanallah. Subhanallah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it very clear to us that I am the Rabb of the Sirius star. Now, if you go into and study the New Age religions, they talk about a sentient beings called the Pleiadians, right? And they come from what is known traditionally, known cosmically as the seven stars, the seven sisters, right? The seven sisters, which is close to the Sirius star system. Now, Umar Farooq, when he wrote the Chit, right, to Darya-e-Nil, the river Nile,
right,
we're about to sacrifice a virgin girl to the river. And this is when the governor representing Islam, who was in Egypt and Misr, wrote to Umar Farooq that this is what they're about to do, because the river had stopped ebbing and flowing, subhanAllah. And in that, they were going to sacrifice, if we study it further, you learn that they were going to sacrifice it to the Sirius star. These are Egyptians. And they were taking their religion from their ancient doctrines, which Freemasons take glean a lot of their religious beliefs from Babylon.
That's right.
Egypt,
yeah.
And in that, in Freemasonry as well, they believe in the apotheosis of man becoming God, Nauzubillah min zalik. Again, goes back to what you've got is the statue in Washington, D.C. Was it of
I know the
pointing up and then down as above. Again, it comes to those two forces, right? They're basically interrelating, just like you've got transgenderism, transhumanism, right? And you've got even the image of Baphomet, right, which is the goat. This is again representative of the deen that Albert Pike refers to in his letter, right? Which is the pure Luciferian religion, because you find on the goat of Baphomet, whilst he's pointing above and down, you'll find a moon and a sun that he's pointing to above and down. And then you'll find that he's got the body of a humanoid body, but a face of features of a goat on his face. He's also got his half male and then half female because he has breasts. And you've got what the staff of Hermes coming out from his nether regions with snakes coiling, and at the top you've got a sun symbolism, with reference to the two opposing sides. And what they believe is when you've got the two opposing sides and there's harmony between them, which is why you find Masonry, they do charity as well as evil stuff that we can't even speak of, right? They find that they get harmony from that, and the two opposites create the divine Nauzubillah min zalik. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it very clear in his kalam that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates all things in pairs. So it's our Rabb who creates everything in pairs. right? And not the opposite, but Iblis Lanatullah reverses that. So we need that balance has to be addressed, but in their beliefs and their doctrines, they actually basically merge the two, right? And do it the opposite, where the man becomes more effeminate and the female becomes more masculine. And for them, they believe that when you merge these two, right, you activate that divinity in you, Nauzubillah. So this is the central religion in the New Age religious beliefs of these two opposing sides, which you've got the checkered board as well in Freemasonry, and that's what represents darkness and light, and merging them two, and that activating the third eye, the pineal gland. This will be the religion of a Dajjal when he comes.
So the Quran talks about Harut and Marut and talks about, they were actually angels, and they obviously introduced the magic at the time of the Solomon, right?
The claim.
So is it, because the way I'm reading the translation right now, it says, Mulk Solomon. So that means the kingdom of Solomon. Is it at the time of Solomon, or it was prior to Solomon?
No. So this is why this is really important, because you're talking about the founding legend of Freemasonry, right? The entire point. So the reason why Freemasons call themselves Masons is because they are builders, right? They are building the bricks, laying the foundation for the rebuilding of the third temple.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? So the first temple was destroyed with the Babylonian conquest. When they were released, they began the second temple. The second temple was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans, and now they want to build the third temple, which is why as well the Templars were named after the temple, because of the entire mythology of rebuilding the third temple is the very basis of the Masonic belief system and the entire agenda that we're witnessing today, right?
Right.
So, but they attributed, and this is where the Quran is clear, falsely attributed it to Suleiman.
Right.
And so, because Solomon obviously did not teach magic.
Right.
The magic was taught by the shayateen. This is what the verse says. And this is what's very clear. So this is why the Solomon would have existed a few hundred years before the Babylonian captivity. And so the story is, so we have to remember too that, the reason why Solomon is considered important here and why his skill or craft is, essential to this legend is because, of course, as we know, Suleiman was given control over the jinn.
Right.
Right. And so this is why Suleiman apparently possessed a seal, which was a six-pointed star in a ring, which gave him control over the jinn. And this is the fundamental belief. And this is why, the sigil of the six-pointed star is core to the entire magical tradition. It's called the Key of Solomon, because control of jinn is basically the basis of magic.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And so the story is apparently that Suleiman, the jinn left a book under his throne or seat, and after he died, it was later discovered, and that's how this book of magic was falsely attributed to Suleiman. So this is what we know, fortunately, from the mercy of Allah to reveal these truths to us, and unfortunately, the opposite is what these secret societies have been holding to for centuries now.
Okay, so just to clarify as well, so that means the Harut and Marut, their exact timeline, it's not definitive. Like it's definitely way before even Moses, right?
I don't know. I don't think so. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Those are level of details that are difficult. Another point that I discovered. So I co-wrote another book with brother Mustaqim Blair, and he recently made a translation of a New English translation of the Quran, and I asked him about the word Satans. Right, the shayateen, it says, were the ones who taught magic and falsely attributed to Suleiman.
Right.
And unfortunately, I don't read Arabic, so I haven't been able to find anything in any literature to explain what the shayateen mean. There's one hadith in Bukhari that talks about the shaitan
I can't remember the details of it, but it's only one. And I asked him, is it possible that shayateen means Satanists?
Mm-hmm.
And it is possible. So they might have been learning magic from Satanists. Because there's another very important point here that this verse is very clear about, and it says that the purchasers of magic know that they have no part in the hereafter.
They have essentially sold their soul, essentially, to the
They have
devil.
essentially sold their soul.
As the saying goes, yeah.
As the saying goes, which is, of course, is a commonly repeated theme throughout, right? I mean, the most modern version of that story is Faust, written by Goethe, who was a member of the Illuminati. Right? So it's a common theme that has been popular for a very long time. So it's very difficult to understand, but we need to be mindful of it because it helps us to understand how they can operate at the level that they do, right? How can they carry out plans and plans that are so openly diabolical, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which for most other people are basically unthinkable if they know that it leads to hellfire. So they're conscious of their decision, is what it seems. So if they remember, what's important here is that we're talking about learning magic from Satanists in Babylon in the 6th century BC by a group of Jews. This is not the entire community. This is a segment now that it's been isolated to, a segment who return their back on the religion. This is what the verse says, right? So who apostatize consciously. So they might continue to profess some kind of Judaism or identify with the Jewish as a people, but when it comes to their religion, they have rejected God and chosen Satan as their God, and done so knowingly, and have chosen to learn magic to help to what they think is help them work towards their objectives.